Welcome back to the deep dive. We are here ready to take a challenging stack of source material and really deliver the essential, insightful analysis you need. Today we're opening what has to be one of the darkest chapters in modern American criminology. We're examining the case of Gary Heidnick.
Yeah, and it's more than just a horror story, isn't it? It's a really profound and frankly disturbing study in the pathology of absolute control.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Executed by a man who was, oddly enough, highly intelligent, but also had these deep, deep psychological deficits.
that's precisely it. And when we look at the sources, I mean, the exhaustive details about Heidnick's criminal career, everything from his childhood right up to, the events at 3520 North Marshall Street.
Yeah.
What really emerges isn't chaos. It's actually a meticulous kind of calculated progression.
Okay.
So our mission today really is to get past the shock value, if we can. We need to deconstruct the pathological trajectory of his crimes, explore that deliberate methodology he used, and those unique signature behaviors, the things that expressed his innermost psychological need for dominance.
Okay, let's unpack that trajectory then, because, to understand the monster, you really have to look at the foundations of the pathology. Gary Michael Heidnick, born 1943, his early life was just defined by this crippling instability, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Especially after his parents divorced. And there were reports of severe physical and emotional abuse, mostly from his father.
And those developmental stressors, they're absolutely crucial because they seem to directly inform his later compulsion for control.
Yeah.
The abuse wasn't just random violence. It was like specifically designed to inflict intense public psychological shame, powerlessness.
Yeah.
Our sources highlight one detail it's searing, really. Heidnik suffered from chronic bedwetting as a child.
Right.
And his father, allegedly, forced him to hang the soiled sheets from the bedroom window, basically using public display to inflict this profound humiliation.
Wow. I mean, that's such a direct attack on a child's dignity, isn't it? On
Yeah.
their control over their own body. If your whole environment is defined by that kind of relentless shame, well, the need to achieve absolute power later seems almost like a psychological imperative, a way to compensate.
And that sense of inadequacy, it was just compounded socially. He was profoundly isolated, ostracized by peers. They teased him, apparently, for the unusual shape of his head. He wouldn't make eye contact, just lacked those basic skills for human relationships.
But here's where that paradox comes in, the thing that makes his case so chillingly unique. It's the massive contrast, right, between those profound social deficits and his, remarkable intelligence.
Yeah.
His IQ was tested somewhere between 130 and 148. That's gifted range.
And that huge cognitive dissonance. That's the engine, really, for his eventual crimes. He had the mental horsepower to think strategically, to plan, to acquire complex knowledge,
Right.
but he just lacked the emotional tools for any genuine connection. And this fueled this immense resentment, If he couldn't get status or dominance through normal social ways,
When he'd engineer it.
he'd use his intelligence, his resources, to engineer an environment specifically, that basement where absolute control was guaranteed, regardless of ethics, social norms, anything.
That compensatory drive, as you called it.
It's absolutely key.
And you see this toxic environment kind of culminating tragically with this mother's suicide in 1970. She ingested mercuric chloride.
Awful.
The whole family unit was just completely fractured. And Heidnik was left navigating life with these incredibly deep emotional wounds.
And those attempts to navigate life, they pretty quickly led to clinical intervention. He did try to find structure, enlisted in the Army at 17, trained as a medic, did well initially. But those underlying issues, they derailed his service really fast.
How fast are we talking?
Just 13 months. By October 1962, he gets an honorable discharge, but it's due to mental health reasons.
Okay.
The formal diagnosis was schizoid personality disorder. If you look at the clinical description, pervasive detachment from social relationships, restricted emotional range.
It maps perfectly.
It perfectly maps onto his earlier isolation and, crucially, his later ability to see human beings as, almost like objects, things to be manipulated or used for a goal, not felt for.
With that detachment.
That detachment is really the first major psychological precursor we see for the scale of his later crimes.
So after the military, his life just seems characterized by persistent crisis. I mean, between 62 and his final arrest in 87, the sources mention numerous psychiatric hospitalizations and at least 13 documented suicide attempts. He was living right on the razor's edge of psychological breakdown for decades.
But you still have this incredible duality. He used his military training, got a license as a practical nurse, though he lost that job. Poor attendance, rude behavior.
Right.
But more importantly, he had this stunning, almost cold aptitude for finance. And that was the resource that gave him independence from society.
Okay, let's talk about the money. Because his wealth really becomes the fundamental enabler for his pathology, doesn't it?
Oh, it was essential. Absolutely essential. He started with, what, $1,500 in a Merrill Lynch account back in 1975.
Yeah.
And he skillfully speculated in the stock market, grew that to over $500,000.
Wow.
And that wealth provided two things. One, a kind of veneer of legitimacy, the Rolls-Royce, the Cadillac.
Outward signs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it gave him the ability to secure the house, 3520 North Marshall Street. And to operate completely outside conventional oversight. He didn't need a job, didn't need social interaction. He was financially insulated. And that allowed his dark fantasies to really flourish privately.
And he coupled that financial insulation with this sort of manufactured identity of authority.
Yes. The United Church, the Ministers of God. Established in 1971, he appoints himself Brother Bishop.
Brother Bishop.
Yeah. I mean, this wasn't genuine religion, obviously. It was a really thinly veiled mechanism of control. It gave him an excuse to gather vulnerable people around him, gave him this false sense of moral, spiritual authority that he clearly craved.
So you've got the trauma, the intelligence, the money, the isolation, and this manufactured authority. All of these elements just seem to coalesce in that 1978 crime, the precursor offense, which basically served as his, training exercise.
Absolutely. That 78 crime, it established his initial modus operandi. He kidnapped and imprisoned Alberta Davidson. She was the intellectually disabled sister of his girlfriend at the time.
Right.
Kept her in his basement, raped her, confined her. He got convicted, served over 4 years in prison for that.
Okay.
But what's critical here is that this was a full-scale rehearsal for the later crimes. It proved the venue worked the basement as an environment of control. It established his preferred victim type, vulnerable women, less likely to be missed immediately, and it validated his expression of dominance through sexual assault and imprisonment.
So instead of prison being rehabilitative, it seems like it gave him time to perfect these violent fantasies.
It was time for refinement, yeah. When he got out, he had the money, he had the place, and he had a proven blueprint. So the strategic execution of the main phase of his crimes, it really begins with highly specific victim selection.
What were the key criteria then? How did he minimize risk and fulfill this ultimate fantasy?
Okay, first and foremost, low risk. He exclusively targeted women who were seen as precarious, vulnerable. The sources mentioned victims like Sandra Lindsay. She had an intellectual disability. Josefina Rivera worked as a part-time prostitute.
Right.
They were individuals less likely to be immediately sought after or reported missing, especially in that kind of chaotic urban environment of North Philadelphia.
And there was also this really disturbing, explicit ideological motive behind the selection too, wasn't there?
There was, yeah. All 6 of the captives during that 86-87 period were black women. His stated goal, which came out later through his lawyer, was to impregnate up to 10 women to create a perfect race. Yeah, this profoundly disturbed racial and eugenic ideology.
Yeah.
It elevated his actions, in his mind anyway, from just personal sadism to this highly structured, controlled project. It defined his victim pool and gave his crimes this twisted sense of purpose.
And his method for luring them, the MO, was consistently low risk, designed to minimize his exposure.
Precisely. He used the simplest, most transactional approach you can imagine, exploiting economic precarity. He'd just drive through North Philly, lure victims with promises of a bit of cash, sometimes food, and then bring them back to the isolation of Marshall Street. It was quick, repetitive, and really effective at getting them into that controlled environment.
Which brings us to that environment itself, the basement lair at 3520 North Marshall Street. This space wasn't just used, it was meticulously engineered for total subjugation, psychological and physical.
Oh, absolutely. The physical space is where the practical MO and his unique psychological signature really merge, most clearly.
Yeah.
The most horrific feature, the pit.
The pit, yeah.
Heidnik spent considerable time digging this hole deep into the concrete floor, big enough to hold up to 3 women at once. Covered it with a wooden board, concealed it with bags of dirt.
Why the pit, though? I mean, why go to that extent? Wouldn't a locked room or chains have been enough?
Because the pit was more than just practical confinement. It was a symbolic grave, a space of utter sensory deprivation. It forced the women into this state of absolute constant helplessness. It speaks volumes about the level of control he needed, not just physical restraint, but this kind of psychological entombment. that meticulous planned construction, that's a definite signature element, points to a long-held dark fantasy.
And the rest of the imprisonment setup was equally systematic. It almost reflects his nursing background, maybe. That attention to detail with the restraints.
Yes, the system was designed for permanence. Heavy shackles, chains. He anchored his victims securely to a sewer pipe. And for punishment, he installed this large, robust hook in the ceiling rafters, like industrial hardware, specifically for the torture of suspending victims by the wrist. Every single component in that basement was a tool in his arsenal of dominance.
So once a victim was lured inside the house, what was the immediate process? How did he subjugate them? It wasn't a conversation. It was just instant power assertion.
The process was designed for immediate, overwhelming shock and control. He'd lure the woman in and, initially, often engage in consensual sex, which, lulled the victim into this false sense of security.
Right.
Then instantly, he'd choke her unconscious. By the time she woke up, she'd be dragged to the basement and already chained.
God.
This ensured that the victim's first conscious realization in that house was one of total physical helplessness, cementing his dominance right from the very first moments of captivity.
The pace of this whole project, it accelerated terrifyingly quickly. The timeline for the Marshall Street captivities, just between November 86 and March 87, it shows this rapid assembly of his quote-unquote harem and an almost immediate escalation to murder. Let's maybe walk through the exact chronology just to emphasize the gravity of these dates.
Okay, we start late November 1986. On November 25th or 26th, he abducts the first captive, Josefina Rivera. She was 25 years old. And she ultimately becomes the key to the entire case.
And the others just followed in rapid succession after that.
Frighteningly fast.
Yes.
Between late 86 and January 87, he abducts the second captive, 24-year-old Sandra Lindsay, who, as we mentioned, had intellectual disabilities.
Okay.
Then, just within the single month of January 1987, he adds the third and fourth captives, 19-year-old Lisa Thomas and 18-year-old Jacqueline Askins. All four of them imprisoned in the pit, living in just profound filth and sensory deprivation.
4 women, chained in a hole in the ground. The transition from imprisonment to sadism and then to murder, it was swift, and it focused on Sandra Lindsay first.
Lindsay's death, early February 1987. It seems driven by what he perceived as disobedience, which was the ultimate affront to his need for absolute command.
Right.
So, as punishment, he uses that torture infrastructure we discussed. She was suspended by one handcuffed wrist from the ceiling hook. She endured that agonizing position for several days, fed only bread and water. But the really crucial escalation was forcing the other women to participate in her torment.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He commanded another captive to beat Lindsay, shattering any potential victim's solidarity right
And
there.
she died from that combination, prolonged abuse, starvation, untreated fever. But the events after her death, they went far beyond just the practical need to hide a crime, didn't they? They entered this realm of just depraved ritual.
He absolutely did. Lindsay's death triggered this phase of grotesque ritualism. It's a signature behavior meant to express total dominance over life and death itself. He carried her body up to the kitchen, dismembered it there, and our sources confirm these horrifying details. He cooked her ribs in the oven, boiled her head in a pot on the stove,
Oh, my God.
and stored other parts in his freezer, explicitly labeled dog food. This wasn't concealment. I mean, the smell, the visible evidence.
Yeah.
It risked exposure. This was a ritual of complete dehumanization.
It really speaks to that idea that the internal pathological need to perform this ritual was stronger than the external rational need to avoid getting caught.
Exactly.
And despite having committed this double-act murder and dismemberment, he immediately seeks a replacement.
Well, the structure of his fantasy, his whole perfect race ideology, it required a specific number of captives.
Yeah.
So, February or March 1987, he abducts his fifth victim, 23-year-old Deborah Dudley, specifically to fill Lindsay's slot. But Dudley proved to be highly uncooperative.
And her resistance led to a completely different but equally horrifying method of execution.
This murder, March 17, 1987, it was cold. Calculated elimination. It proved that when sadism didn't enforce compliance, methodical execution was the backup plan. He forced Dudley and 2 others into the pit, then filled it with water.
Oh, God.
Then he took a stripped electrical extension cord, attached it to Dudley's metal chains, and used the electricity to electrocute her.
It's just clinical.
Extremely deliberate, planned, designed to terrify the other captives into total submission. Her body was later disposed of, just tossed into the Pine Barrens over in New Jersey.
He goes from this slow, agonizing death by starvation and exposure with Lindsay to a quick, technologically executed electrocution with Dudley. That versatility and cruelty is just alarming.
It shows his capacity for functional, adaptable evil. He was experimenting, wasn't he? With the limits of his control, the limits of human endurance. And this experimentation led directly to his final fatal miscalculation.
That miscalculation being believing he'd finally achieved total psychological dominance over Josefina Rivera.
Exactly. By March 23, 1987, Heidnik was so confident in his control that he essentially elevates Rivera from captive to coerced accomplice. He forces her to assist him in abducting his sixth and final victim, 24-year-old Agnes Adams.
Wow.
That act was intended as the ultimate demonstration of his power, making a victim participate in the destruction of others.
But Rivera, she was playing this incredibly dangerous, calculated long game all along.
She was. The very next day, March 24th, 1987, Rivera convinces Heidnik to drive her to a gas station. The pretense was visiting her family. She promised she'd return.
And he bought it.
He was completely convinced by her feigned submission. His ego got the better of him. When she reached the gas station, she seized the opportunity, ran to her boyfriend's nearby apartment, and immediately called the police. That moment when Heidnik's pride in his absolute psychological control just momentarily overcame his practical paranoia that ended the 4 months of terror.
So if the chronology details the MO, the how he did it, then the specific acts of torture, those are the signature, the elements that really reveal the unique pathology of Gary Heidnik. Let's dig a bit deeper into these mechanics of cruelty that went beyond just simple physical restraint.
Yeah, the objective of these signature behaviors, it seems, was total psychological violation, designed to just dismantle their sense of self. We already touched on starvation and dehumanization, the ultimate control of necessity, forcing them to eat degrading things like dog food to break their will.
But the detail that always just stops you in your tracks in this case is the auditory torture, which kind of fused sadism with this cold logic.
It is a chilling fusion, isn't it? To prevent the victim's screams from being heard by neighbors, which was a functional problem, it risked exposure. Heidnik would stab them in the ears with a screwdriver.
Oh, God.
This isn't just random injury. It's a specific, targeted act of cruelty designed to enforce silence. It proves he could use extreme violence to solve a logistical issue while at the same time maximizing pain. It just shows a mind that's coldly rational in service of the completely irrational.
And the use of electricity, he incorporated that into both torture and execution.
He did. He used non-lethal electrocution as a punishment tool before he weaponized it to execute Deborah Dudley. Electricity gave him a way to inflict intense, sudden pain without leaving easily identifiable marks, which might complicate disposal or, hide the crime from casual observers. Again, high intelligence just channeled into adaptable, calculated cruelty.
But the ultimate signature acts, the ones driven purely by psychological need, not by any practical MO, that has to be the forced cannibalism and the manipulation of legal guilt.
Absolutely. The forced cannibalism after Sandra Lindsay's death, that's the apex of the psychological violation. He processed her flesh, mixed it with dog food, and forced the survivors to eat it. This served no practical purpose for getting rid of the body. He still had plenty of remains to deal with.
So if it wasn't practical disposal, what was the psychological function then? What was he achieving?
It was an act of complete moral and emotional annihilation. By forcing the victims into complicity, making them consume a fellow human, a fellow captive, he achieved several pathological goals at once. He shattered their morale. He instilled this deep, deep guilt. And he permanently destroyed any potential group solidarity. He basically ensured that even if they escaped, they would carry this indelible psychological scar of having participated, however unwillingly, in the degradation and destruction of another.
And the false confession fits that same pattern, doesn't it? That calculated manipulation, forcing Josefina Rivera to write a note confessing to crimes, implicating herself after Dudley's murder.
That act proves he understood the legal system. He understood consequences. He knew that if she felt legally bound by a written confession, she'd be paralyzed by the fear of being prosecuted herself. This is not the action of someone completely lost in delusion. This is the tactical calculation of a narcissist who understands human motivation and legal risk. He was actively trying to bind her through fear and guilt.
Okay, as we move towards the conclusion of this truly harrowing narrative, It's vital we bring the focus back to the human beings who were subjected to this terror. Let's explicitly list the names again of all 6 women held captive at Marshall Street.
Yes. The 2 victims who were murdered were 24-year-old Sandra Lindsay and 23-year-old Deborah Dudley.
Okay.
The 4 women who survived, who were rescued, thanks entirely to the bravery of one of them, were 25-year-old Josefina Rivera, 19-year-old Lisa Thomas, 18-year-old Jacqueline Askins, and 24-year-old Agnes Adams.
And the survival of those 4 women rests entirely on the strategic agency, the incredible courage of Josefina Rivera.
Rivera's conduct while she was captive. This is a profound study in strategic survival. She realized very quickly that open defiance just led to escalating violence, whereas feigned tactical compliance sometimes earned minor privileges, and crucially, it lowered Heidnick's suspicion. She essentially leveraged his own ego against him.
Right.
She played the part of the completely subjugated tool so well that she earned his trust. Enough trust that he felt comfortable using her as an accomplice and briefly letting her outside the house. Her escape wasn't just a lucky break. It was the result of a meticulously calculated plan that exploited his overconfidence in his own psychological power.
Her call to the police, March 24th, 1987, led to the arrest. But even with her harrowing story, there was some initial skepticism from the authorities, wasn't there?
Unfortunately, yes. The first responding officers, they were skeptical. They thought maybe they were just walking into a domestic dispute or something simpler.
Wow.
It actually took Rivera showing them the raw, chafed skin and the deep scars from the metal chains to fully convince them of the gravity of her statement.
Jeez.
And when the police finally tracked Heidnik down and arrested him in his car, his response was just the epitome of detachment. He's focused on bureaucratic complaints. What's this all about, officer? Didn't I pay my child support?
Unbelievable. Just completely disconnected.
Utterly.
The scene they found, of course, 3 chained women, Lindsay's dismembered remains in the kitchen, confirmed every horrific detail. The subsequent trial immediately zeroed in on the ultimate paradox of his case. This highly intelligent man with undeniable severe mental illness.
And the defense team? They staked their entire strategy on the insanity defense, arguing under the McKnighton rule. Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar, McKnighton basically requires the defense to prove that at the time of the crime, the defendant was operating under such a defect of reason from a disease of the mind
Right.
that they didn't know the nature and quality of the act they were doing, or if they did know it, they didn't know what they were doing was wrong, legally wrong.
And they argued his schizophrenia, his schizoid diagnosis, placed him firmly on the wrong side of that rule, that he couldn't appreciate the wrongfulness.
Precisely. They brought in expert testimony. Dr. Kuhl argued Heidnik was acting under a systematized delusion, that he thought God commanded him to produce this certain race of children. The defense framed the ritualistic stuff, the cannibalism, the pit, as clear evidence that his actions were completely delusional, meaning he fundamentally didn't understand the wrongfulness like a rational person would.
But the prosecution, they focused entirely on the calculating side of his mind, didn't they? The deception, the planning, the sheer rationality inherent in his MO.
And this is where the prosecution landed, the decisive blow, the counter-argument of malingering, basically strategic criminal deception, faking it,
Okay.
and the smoking gun. It came directly from Josefina Rivera's testimony. She revealed that Heidnik explicitly told her he planned to act crazy in court.
He told her that.
Yes, making dramatic gestures like saluting the judge,
Right.
all to manipulate the legal system into finding him legally insane.
Wait. He was coaching his victim on how he was going to fake his way through the trial? That fundamentally undercuts the whole idea of him being truly delusional at that point.
It absolutely does. And the source material provides even more evidence of this calculated strategy. His own defense attorney later stated that Heidnik himself fabricated and spread the rumor about forcing his victims to eat human flesh.
Why? Why would he do that?
He believed that the sheer grotesque horror of that detail would bolster his claim of madness, make the insanity defense more convincing to the jury, to the public. He understood the legal test for insanity, and he attempted to perform the madness required to beat it.
That distinction, the difference between being genuinely mentally ill, which he clearly was, and strategically manipulating that illness to try and control the legal outcome, that's what broke the defense.
The jury ultimately rejected the insanity defense. They concluded that despite his undeniable mental illness, he possessed the rational capacity to understand the wrongfulness of his actions. So on July 1st, 1988, Gary Heidnick was found guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, rape, sentenced to death.
And even his final act. It was one last attempt to control the narrative of his own life.
He insisted on his execution, framed it not as justice being served, but as some kind of political martyrdom, claimed it would expose a corrupt justice system, bring about the abolition of capital punishment. It was just a final, grandiose, narcissistic attempt to define his own legacy.
Just astounding.
Gary Heidnick was executed by lethal injection on July 6, 1999, and he remains, as of 2025, the last person executed in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
His life was just truly bookended by this overwhelming pathological desire for dominance, right from his childhood humiliation up to his final attempts to control the very context of his own death. Hashtag outro. So what does this deep dive into the criminology of Gary Heidnick really tell us when you synthesize all the source material? It seems his crimes were this logical, albeit horrifying, extension of his high intellectual capacity combined with his developmental pathology. He took that foundational psychological need for absolute control, refined it through financial isolation, through that precursor crime, and then executed it with the strategic precision his intelligence allowed, creating a signature that was both meticulous and just grotesquely ritualistic.
And if we step back and maybe connect this to the bigger picture of criminal justice,
Yeah.
the Heidnik case really forces us to reflect deeply on the boundaries of culpability, doesn't it? Here you had a man who was undeniably severely mentally ill, diagnosed, hospitalized, frequently suicidal. Yet his intellect afforded him this critical, rational ability to understand the complex legal definitions of insanity and then attempt to perform delusion to control his own judicial outcome.
Right.
So this raises, I think, an essential question for you, the listener, to mull over. How should the legal system adjudicate that line? The line between genuine delusion stemming from a known mental disease and the strategic criminal deception used to manipulate the very definition of legal sanity. Where do we draw it?